Hi, it's me, Jazzy. I'm back with another tech-related video, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the tools and equipment that I use when I'm doing my electronics repairs and kits. I've had a few people asking me about some of the things they've seen me using, like the PCB holder and the leg straighteners, and whether I can put some links up. So I'm going to link in the video description down below to all the things that I normally use on the channel. You'll see me using in many of my repair videos and electronics kits. Some of these things I pick up from Amazon, some are from Temu. They're also available from other places as well, but this is just a look from my perspective at the tools that I use on a regular basis. Of course, there's many different takes on this, and this is just my view of what I've been using. There may be other tools available or better tools, but I'm always on a little bit of a budget here with the channel, so I tend to go for the best value that I can get. Now, the one thing I do get asked about quite a lot is this little PCB holder. Now, I find this very, very handy because when you're soldering or working on a PCB, you don't want the board moving all over the place. And this is just a handy little way of getting the board to stay in place. So, when I've got that on my bench, I can pop my PCB in there. So you just pop your board in and then you can just tighten that up and just do the thumb screws. That just stops it moving about. And then as you're working on the item, you can turn it if you want to spin it over to see the underside of the board. So when you're doing your soldering, you can just spin it back over. It's just very, very handy. There's multiple ways you can use it as well. If you don't want it to swivel, you can tighten up these thumb screws here, which stop the board from turning. Otherwise, it might turn unnecessarily. Now, the other way you can do it, I've found if you've got a lot of components on the sides of your board and these are too wide, you can also do it this way as well. So you can slot your board in from this way here. And again, just tighten it up. There we go, just tighten it up, do up thumb screws, and you can do the same thing again. You can just tilt your board. If you don't want it to tilt, you just do these ones up, and that stops it moving. So if you've got to put a bit of pressure on your board for whatever, you're trying to extract a component or something, it doesn't move about. So I just find this is a really, really handy bit of kit. Now, you can get these PCB holders from Amazon. They're also available on Temu. And again, I'll leave the links in the description down below if you want to pick one up. Now, there is another one you can get as well. Now, I've borrowed this from a friend of mine that also does electronics. Very, very similar design. This is a metal one. It's got wing nuts that you can undo on the bottom there instead of the thumb screws. But same thing here. These are obviously plastic because you wouldn't want to be putting a metal one on your PCB, would you? Now, the advantage this one has is it's magnetic. Very handy. So if you've got a metal surface you're working on, you can just magnet it to that and it'll stop your PCB holder moving about. But I do find that other one, for most jobs, is sufficient. This is not a sponsored video by any means. This is literally just a guide to the tools and equipment that I use on a regular basis. Now, the other handy gadget you've probably seen me using on the channel is this IC leg straightener. Now, this is a pretty cool gadget. Obviously, when you're putting in your ICs or your sockets into your PCBs, sometimes you might find where they've been posted or whatever that the legs are not quite straight, or they've gone out of alignment, or they've been slung in the back of a drawer or whatever. It happens. So this has got two sides. So you've got your narrow one this side, and you've got a wider one this side. I just find this is a nice, handy little gadget. I always say it's important to keep the fun in electronics, and having some handy little gadgets like this is just quite pleasing, isn't it? Now, as far as hand tools goes, hand tools are really essential when working on electronics. Now, I've got this Fix-It kit. I swear by this because it's got so many different bits and bobs in here. You've got all your screwdrivers, your bits, your spudgers for taking cases apart. It's got little suction cups if you're working on phones and stuff and you want to take screens out and things. It's just handy. It's just got so many bits and bobs in here. You can see all the bits, and it keeps it all organized in a case because I am terrible for putting bits down and losing them. It happens all the time. The screwdriver it comes with is quite nice as well. It's got quite a nice action to it for little bits and bobs. It's quite handy when you've got to get in tight spaces because it's quite thin. Sometimes you need a screwdriver with a bit more gusto. I use these kind of screwdrivers. These are just electrical screwdrivers. They've got that little bit of insulation on the shaft there. I just find they're quite handy to keep a set of these around. Not particularly expensive. Any sort of DIY or tool shop will have them, or Amazon. These are the most used ones that I always keep to hand. I tend to keep my most used tools that I will use on a day-to-day basis really handy, and then everything else I've got in drawers so I can grab it when I need it. I do find half the battle when you're working on an electronics project is trying to find the tool you want when you want it. So having stuff to hand is really key. Wire strippers, of course, got to have some wire strippers. Again, there's loads and loads of different types on the market. I use these ones. These are from Kaiweets. I got these from Amazon, but there are similar ones available from many places. But I do feel a good pair of wire strippers really does save you time when you're making up cables. While we're talking hand tools, things like cutters and pliers are all very handy. I got this little kit, again not super expensive, because if you're first starting out, or like me with the channel, I'm on a bit of a budget, you don't need super expensive stuff to get going. Once you get a bit more experience, or down the line when you want to treat yourself to something a bit more expensive, that's all well and good. But I like to look for stuff that's functional and good value, but not necessarily the cheapest of the cheap. These are made by Mansman, they're from Amazon, and it wasn't super expensive, and it's got all the handy little types of pliers and snippers and cutters that you're likely to need when you're doing hobby electronics. They've got the little spring down there, and I just find they're the right size, quite grippy and quite nippy, which is what you want. Other pliers I use are like these angled ones, which I find are really useful. Sometimes when you're trying to get a component in a difficult place, they can be a real time saver. And just a bigger pair of long nose pliers, because sometimes you need a little bit more oomph, especially when you're working on some of the older test equipment and stuff can be a bit seized up. It's good to have a big chunky pair of pliers so you can get that extra little bit of grip when you need it. So what else do I use on a regular basis? Well, quite often you'll see me using an anti-static strap, which is always a good idea when you're working with sensitive components, especially anything with ICs in it. Always use an anti-static strap to stop myself putting any unwanted static from myself into any components or circuits that I'm working on. Again, there are loads of different ones you can get. I use one of these that you can just pop them on and off. This one just plugs into normal main socket, just so you are earthed and you're not likely to put any static into what you're working on. With these ones, you can also get poppers that go onto your anti-static mats. So you can pop these on, and there's all sorts of different configurations with these. I just use this one because it's quick and simple. Comes with an anti-static strap there, so I just pop that on when I'm working on anything sensitive. I know some people do put it on their ankle, which I guess is a goer. I've never tried it myself. Knowing me, I'd probably forget I've got it on there and trip over it. Another vital thing to have is a basic multimeter. When you're just getting going, you don't need anything really massively expensive. I use this Aneng 8008 on a daily basis just because I find it's handy. It wasn't too expensive. This one's auto ranging, which sometimes is a bonus. But there are a wealth of different multimeters. I find around £25–30 seems to be the sweet spot. You will have seen me testing some cheap and cheerful ones recently on a previous episode, which are okay and they will do the job. I like these Aneng ones because they just seem to be pretty reliable and pretty accurate. The other tester I use all the time is the good old T7 component tester. I find this is really useful for checking out components because you can tell if you've got a good one or a dud one, if the values are way off or it's saying that there's a problem with the component. So if, like me, your memory's not so good and you can't always remember the color bands on the resistors, you can always just stick them in your T7 tester and it'll tell you what you've got. So you're always sure you're getting the right component in the right place. Again, there are other ways of testing. If you're lucky enough to have an LCR meter like the one I borrowed in a previous video, you can do clever things like testing components in circuit, and it gives you a bit more information about the component. But I find the T7 on a basic level is pretty good. Similar ones are available. You might remember the T4 that we built from a kit. It'll do much the same job. This is quite a handy bit of kit that I use quite often as well. I refer to it as a LEN or a NEL because depending on the orientation of it, you have live earth neutral or neutral earth live. And it's handy if you've got to test an appliance that doesn't have a plug on it and you don't want to put a plug on it because you don't know if the appliance works or you haven't got a plug, you can just pop the wires in here. This is fused, as you can see, and has decent safety plug on it. So if you need to test a bit of equipment, you can just pop the wires in there, close that, and then you're not anywhere near those wires. So you can just plug it in and test your item without having to go to the trouble of putting a plug in. So these are quite handy. This one's quite an old one. This is a safe block. I've got an RS one here as well. Does the same sort of thing. Again, you can see very similar inside. Now, when it comes to the testing of unknown appliances or electrical items, particularly old ones and test gear in particular, you're not sure how they're going to react to a power up, because sometimes I pick up stuff that's been in someone's loft or shed for possibly years and years, and you don't know how it's going to react to actually having some current put through it. I like to use this. It's a Variac. So if you want to power something up gently, you don't want to put the full voltage through it, the Variac's quite a useful bit of kit to have on your bench. These can be picked up second-hand quite cheaply. I even picked up one from a car boot sale recently. A very handy bit of kit. You've got a socket there to plug your appliance in, whatever you're testing, and again, a decent mains plug on the other end. Rather than just sticking the full amount of power through it, you can select what you want to do. Just gradually power it up. I generally use this on old unknown oscilloscopes that I'm repairing that I don't want to put the full voltage through in case it makes something blow. Sometimes you can see any problems ahead of time just by putting that little bit of voltage. At least you can tell if the item's going to power up or not. So, highly recommended, the Variac. And to give an additional level of safety, I also sometimes use this isolating transformer, which again, you can pick them up secondhand. Really handy bit of kit safety wise, isolating yourself from the mains when you're testing items and reducing the risk of electric shock, which in my book and in everyone's book is always a good thing. Now, as far as soldering goes, there are so many different soldering irons on the market. I would say avoid the very cheap. The one I use all the time on the channel is this Yahoo 948D, which I got from Amazon. And the main reason I got this is because it came with the fume extractor, which I think is really good. It's a really good idea to have a fume extractor on your bench. This one came with the fume extractor as part of the package, but you can buy just the standalone fume extractor as well. It's a really good idea if you're working in an enclosed environment. You really don't want to be breathing in those solder fumes. So I highly recommend getting a decent fume extractor for your bench for when you're soldering. Now, I've had this particular soldering iron for roughly 6 months now, and I've been using it a lot. My only complaint with this one is it has a power saving function where the soldering iron goes to sleep. And so many times it's gone to sleep and I haven't realized. And I've gone to solder something on a board. I'm thinking, what's going on here? You look at the display and it says it's gone to sleep. Can be slightly frustrating. Apart from that, I'd say it's actually not bad for the money. It does come with the little stand, and it does come with a roll of solder. This is unleaded solder. One thing I will say though is when you first start soldering, if you think you're really bad at soldering, you're probably not that bad. I found the unleaded solder is not that easy to work with. I've never had a great deal of success with it. I tend to prefer using the leaded solder. I just find I get a better joint and it's easier to work with. This one's from RS. Had this in stock for a little while now, but you can still pick it up. And I'd say if you're having trouble with your soldering, it could be this. So look at getting yourself some leaded solder rather than the probably quite cheap quality unleaded solder that will come in your starter kit with the soldering iron. Again, all of this is just my opinion. Your mileage may vary depending on your experience level and what you're using. There are so many different options. That's the great thing about the world of electronics. There's a wealth of stuff out there to try and hopefully make life easier when you're doing your electronics repairs. Other ways that I like to make life easier for myself, I just like to have little containers around. So when I'm dismantling something or I've got the components ready for a project to assemble, I just like little containers around that are just handy to keep parts to hand. I keep my most used tools to hand. I have a little tray on the edge of my bench here where I store my most used tools, and everything else is in a drawer nearby so I can get it when I need it. But it's great to have everything within arm's reach, especially when you're in the middle of a repair and an unexpected extra fault comes up, or you need to do an additional test of something. It's great to have all the bits you need to hand. This is just my opinion. As far as tools and equipment goes, everyone's personal preference is different. Everyone's bench layout is different, and the way everyone works is different. But you might find that some of the tools and gadgets that I use are helpful to you. I do hope so. If you've got any great ideas or suggestions for tools or gadgets that you find particularly useful, do let me know in the comments down below, because it might be useful for some of our viewers as well to know other different ideas for things that can make your life easier when you're doing home electronics and repairs and electronics kits. Other things that I use: a squeezy bottle of water just for topping up your soldering iron sponge for cleaning your tip. It's just, again, another thing that's handy to have to hand. I have a smaller one here with isopropyl alcohol, which is very handy. Sometimes you need to clean up something on a board or on a project. Heatsink compound, again, many different brands available. Servicol is the one I use. Label remover is great for cleaning up cases. Sometimes you've got old calibration labels and stuff and sticky residue on cases. It's just nice to make them look their best. And a good switch cleaner as well. I do tend to use this one a lot when I'm refurbishing test equipment, just to make sure the switches are making good contact and remain reliable. And a freeze spray as well, which is quite handy in fault finding. As far as cleaning up the cases of secondhand test gear that I've had donated or purchased, I use this foam cleanser. This works really well. It's not too harsh, doesn't seem to damage any of the paintwork or finishes, and does a good job. But again, a little bit messy. Get yourself an old toothbrush or something for getting right in there into the grooves and getting all that grime out. Some of this stuff's clocking on for 40, 50 years old now. I know the feeling. Other than that, just a good surface cleanser and loads of cleaning roll. Another really useful thing that you'll see on a lot of my videos is my silicone mat here that I use for soldering and general repair work. It's really handy. You've got loads of different compartments here for all bits and bobs. Some of these are even magnetic, so if you pop screws down and things, little washers, they stay in place. There's loads of these available. I literally just went on Amazon and bought the biggest one I could find, because then I can work on consoles, computers, little televisions and stuff, and I've got enough room to work. Underneath this, I do have a anti-static mat which covers the whole of my bench. This goes all the way along my bench, and this is the mat that you can actually connect your anti-static strap to as well. And I find it's just a really nice surface to work on when I'm doing repairs, soldering, or any kind of electronics work. So as for daily driver test gear that I use on my bench, I think there's 4 things that are the most important to me. One is a good bench power supply. I'm using a Fandar one at the moment. I've also got a Farnell one that I'm refurbishing with the analog meters on it, which I'll be using also once I get round to finishing it. So a good power supply is definitely a must. It's just so handy for powering up bits of gear, projects that you're building, and also even for things that you don't necessarily have the right adapter for. I collect old games consoles, and so often I pick up a console, don't have the right power supply for it. So as long as I've got the correct polarity on the barrel jack, I can power it up off my bench power supply, because you can give it whatever voltage and ampage it needs to be able to work. They're just so handy for so many things. I'd say that's probably the single most important bit of test equipment I've got, next to my oscilloscope. Now you might remember the oscilloscope kit I built in one of my earlier videos. Now these may not be the best or most accurate, but they are a good way to learn how an oscilloscope works. An oscilloscope is so handy in fault finding, particularly like me when you're working on old games consoles and retro computers. Couldn't do without a decent oscilloscope. Now when I first started the channel I had one on loan, but then I got myself this Hitachi, which is a Hitachi V422. This is an analog 2-channel 40 megahertz scope. You can pick these up secondhand and they're quite a fun project to refurbish. So you can easily get schematics and service manuals for them. So they're definitely worth having. You don't have to pay a fortune for a scope. You can get yourself a really nice digital scope further down the line, but for now, I think for bench use, a decent analog scope is a really good bit of kit to have on your bench. Two other bits of kit that I use on a regular basis are a frequency counter and a signal generator. You might remember the signal generator and frequency counter kits that I made in some of my previous videos. Again, these are a good start and inexpensive. You can find these quite easily on Temu, AliExpress or Wish. They're 10 a penny. But a good way to learn how these devices actually work. Now for bench use, I don't actually have a working frequency counter. I do have a couple that I'm working on as projects. I have a couple of Black Star units that I'm working on. I'm currently using this Raycall Dana 1998 frequency counter, which I'm lucky enough to have on loan. Now I didn't actually have a working frequency counter other than the one I've got on loan. But I have just picked up this Raycall Dana 9902A. I got it from eBay and I got it for £20 and apparently it's working. I will give it a service and a check over inside. It's literally just arrived, so I haven't even investigated it yet. But if this is all good, that means I'll have a working frequency counter for my bench and I can return the other Raycall Dana, which I'm sure the owner will be very pleased about. The signal generator I'm using at the moment is another Fandar unit. It's a TG501 that I was given when I first started the channel, and it does the job quite nicely. I think they are, for me, the 4 most important bits of test gear on my bench. They're the bits that I will use on a day-to-day basis. There are other niceties, like I say, something like an LCR meter is really good to have. They can be quite expensive. So I've got an upcoming episode where we're going to build one from a kit. So stay tuned for that, because I think it's something that's very, very handy and I can't always get hold of one when I need to borrow one to do a project. Sometimes it's easier to test things in circuit when you can. And again, the LCR meter does give you more of an indication than the little T7 or T4 testers. So I hope you found that useful, as people have been asking me about some of the gadgets and tools that I use on the channel when you see me doing the projects. I'll put all the links in the video description down below so you can see where you can get these tools or similar ones from. And in my book, any gadget that makes your life easier when you're in the middle of an electronics project and you've got your hands full is a really good thing. So thanks for watching. Hope you found this useful. If you've got any suggestions or comments for little gadgets or tools that you find super useful when you're doing your electronics, please leave them in the comments below. As always, massive thanks to everyone for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing and commenting. It's always much appreciated. I'll be back soon with some more electronics kits, test gear repairs and retro games consoles. So take care and I'll see you on the next one.